Hi, this is Roger Coley. I'm with Frymaster, and this short video is to introduce you to the new UHCHD-T, the latest generation of holding cabinet that Frymaster makes for McDonald's. This cabinet is largely different than the previous version in that it has a touchscreen and no controllers on the bezels, and it's slightly taller. We'll get into the details of it in a bit, but that's the gist of it, and that's our intention today, is just to introduce you to this cabinet that was started rolling out in February. Some of you may have already encountered it. It's been pretty robust. We've not had too many calls about it, so hopefully you've not had an adverse encounter with it. Just some disclaimers here. This information is open to anybody, but it doesn't make you an authorized technician for Frymaster. This is these bullet points are essentially a reiteration of the disclaimer that ran at the front of the video before it started. But essentially, this means that if you watch this, you are not qualified to be a warranty service technician and to do warranty work on the behalf of Frymaster. So that's a legal requirement we have to put out there. I've got a brief video here. Let's put this in show mode for it to run, in which you can see the cabinet operate. The purpose of this is essentially just to see how the touchscreen behaves in operation. This is an earlier version of the screen, so there may be modest variations. As I said, the cabinet was introduced in February, and there's been some running changes with the software that have changed the screen, but the gist of it is what you will see here.
The new generation of UHCHD cabinets introduces a single touchscreen to control all cabinet positions. The touchscreen on the UHCHD Touch opens a press-and-go screen that displays a yellow and brown graphic as it warms to set point. The moving brown bar shows the progress of the heating. The icons along the left side of the screen can be navigated as the cabinet warms. Pressing the Day Parts button produces a pop-up that allows switching from a
We can stop that there. That's some operational stuff. As I said, the screen has changed some, so it's but not operationally. It's still largely the same. Just to give you an idea how it behaves. This is how it looks in place. This is one of the earlier versions that was installed here in Shreveport, where Frymaster is based. You can see that it's slightly taller than its predecessor, the 6-row UHCHD that's visible to the right. We did make sure that the shoulder bolts that attach that condiment tray between the two were in the same plane on both units. So if you find yourself installing one adjacent to an existing 6-row unit, that's not going to be a problem for you. So there's that for installation. Just as an overview, this is how they appear. As mentioned before, there are no, let me grab this laser pointer over here. Yep. There it is. As in the earlier unit, all these were live buttons. There was a circuit board in there, and each of those, you operated the cabinet, programmed the cabinet with this, you changed temperatures, all that stuff that was spread over all those rows, front and back, is largely here now. There are no controls in this. There are just the heated plates that are controlled by here. There's a USB port there, a switch. This is how the rows are numbered by McDonald's, oddly 6 at the bottom, 1 at the top. That's how they do it. But that's largely the difference. In this cabinet, over time, should prove to be more robust than the others, just from the lack of exposure of all the circuitry that was in the heated area. Another advantage to a servicer on this unit is unlike previous versions where McDonald's wouldn't allow screws to be on an external part of the unit, this unit does have screws that attach the top. These screws have a small O-ring that protects them. As you can see, they're flush, but once removed, and you protect the O-ring when it comes out, that's principally just to prevent debris and moisture from getting into the top of the cabinet. All the running gear is under this lid, and you can take it off without taking off the sides. The previous unit, you had to take off the sides to reveal the screws and braces that basically held the top on. So this one, it's in a tight position. You can get the top off and see virtually all the running gear. The screws that hold the side are as they were on the other one, but that's all they do. They just hold the side. They take the screws out. You can lift the side away, but it doesn't really. The only the left side holds wires and whatnot. There's really no, other than if you were replacing a slot, no reason to really be into the sides. All, as like I said, all the running gears there. You'll notice that the screws that hold the bezels, what we call these, basically the face of the slot, are held here. That bolt holds the extruded metal that the two heated plates rest in. This little Allen screw holds the bezel. This little screw will be on every one of the bezels as well. It's allowed to basically pull that L-shaped bezel in square against the vertical face of the cabinet, ensuring that no food elements can find their way into the recesses of the cabinet. So, but if you find yourself needing to take off the side or take out a bezel, this guy can flummox you because it's not readily seen unless you poke your head around there. So if you take this out, loosen this, and are about to remove the bezel and it won't come out, you need to look for the screw. If you don't, you'll find yourself breaking the bezel trying to pull it out. This is the left side. As I mentioned, there's just nothing over there to speak of that you would have to deal with on a routine service call. There's the RTD wires here that are on the temperature probes on each plate, and these are the high voltage leads to the heaters on each plate. This unit, unlike the others, the heater, if you replace a heater, you don't replace the plate. The heater is stuck on. So you take the plate out, you pull off the old one, put on the new one, it would have the new RTD on it. So that's a different operational or technical procedural operation that would occur in the field. The heater is the foiled backed resistive material that is stuck on to the heater plate. There's not a new sheet of metal that goes out as a new heater plate. As I mentioned, this is the view from the top, and this is basically all the bits. This board here replaces the circuit boards that you may be familiar with from all the previous generations. There used to be distribution boards on the side, COM boards, and so on the top. All that is now gone. We've got one board that manages all of that. It's fed 208 single phase through this line filter here into that relay, the relay into the board. That's the high power going out. That's the RTDs. These are the connections for the two controllers. There's one in the front and the back. This is a 12 volt DC power supply that's also fed to 208, and it essentially provides all the controlled voltage for the unit. This is a dongle, as it's called, that allows the cabinet, if it were looking to do that in the McDonald setting, to talk to Wi-Fi. Currently, that's not in the McDonald's playbook, so it's there if and when they move to that. But right now, it's not used. But that's what that is. This port over here is your USB port for the front of the fryer. Speaker, two cooling fans. That's pretty much the top and bottom of the material that's in there. As I've mentioned, we've not had a lot of issues with it from the field, so I'm not aware of having to change one of these boards. Clearly, there's a lot of wires there. You'd have to be attentive if you were faced to do that. If an RTD, a triac failed on the board, that could lead to that. If you had if a failure of temperature sensing occurred where the RTD is attached to the board, that could lead to that. But clearly, you'd have to be attentive to all of these leads to intend that they get back to the plate and the slot that they are heating. Another view of just the same thing with more annotation. This is the primary UI, the secondary UI. They are essentially the same. We'll talk more about them as we progress about their software load and how to update that. There's a number of USB ports we talked about. I think we've already talked about that. And they're replicated on the back, so you'll find that the secondary UI is has a lot of unused USB ports hanging off there. This one has a port that goes to that dongle. It has a USB port that goes to, a USB lead that goes to that. And then you've got the connections to the board. Both of the UIs have that. Here's a close-up of that main board. You'll see the fans connection there. The fans are 12 volt DC. There, the UI connections. It's all pretty straightforward. Just another look at the UI, or the user interface. It's sealed in there pretty tight, and to get it out, to deal with it, you have to remove all these screws, take off that frame. Excuse me. You have to remove the wires that are there. That would be an impediment. Excuse me. Get a drink of water. That's how that looks. These are are a close-up of or an inset of the socket on the side of the UI where software is changed. This is an earlier version of the UI. The current version has a more generous cut to allow you to slide that SD card into place. The current setup is, if you have a failed UI front or back, the kit that comes will have one UI and two SD cards, one for the front, one for the back. You have to be attentive to that. And when you replace one or the other, say if you replace a front UI, and if there had been a software update from the time that UI went out as a service part and reached you, and your unit had an earlier version, you'd also need to replace the software in the rear UI. And you check that. We'll get to that in a bit. But when you check the software versions, you have to go through the steps to reach the software version display with the front UI, and then repeat those key entries into the rear UI to see what software version is showing. If they're out of sync, then you would need to replace that. But essentially, that's the port in the body of the UI where the software card goes. And again, we've other than some early versions that were related to testing, we've not had a great deal of issue with that, so shouldn't come up. But like I said, the kit does include a front and rear card or SD card with the software on it, and you just have to be attentive to which one you're replacing when you install the new UI. Again, this is another shot of all the USB ports and whatnot that are attached to this primary UI that you have to be attentive of when you're removing it. Just a close-up of the DC power supply. Again, this is the bezels. This one's made on an earlier version. It still has the insets for where those controls used to be. The newer ones don't have that, but the point being that there are no controls on those bezels anymore. There's no vulnerability associated with migration of oil, either rising from the heated trays or finding its way into the screw. There's nothing there for them to trouble. You may find on occasion that pulling this, the trays in and out might loosen this, but that's not, it's an operational issue. You may have to find yourself replacing one of these bezels or cleaning that because of that, but there's no harm to the electronics of the cabinet because of harm to that bezel. Quick look at the wiring diagram. As I mentioned, it's 208 single phase, so you've got it coming in through this line filter, circuit breaker here, the switch here that is basically protected from the heavy line voltage by this relay here. Throw that, and you get your 208 to the heaters. You get your 208 to the 12-volt DC power supply, which also supplies the power through the board to all the other components in the unit. The UI that we talked about has its own onboard power, and it's runs initially off the 12-volt DC, makes additional power to run it, but there's no replaceable components within the UI. It's if it's failed, there's no component on it that you can replace. This is the screen. This is essentially where you will interact and where the store will interact with the cabinet. The icons on here, press and go at the top left, is arrived at by touching the house icon. That's press and go, and it essentially takes you to the operational field. That's where all the items would be shown. When they're gray, it's at operating temperature. They touch it, changes colors. We'll go through a little more of that later. The book icon, top right, is where menus are changed and edited. The cog is the settings area, and we'll go through that in more detail. There's 11 screens behind there. That's the area. If you find yourself having to deal with the cabinet and to use some of the, if it's onboard diagnostics, you'll use that. The other USB icon is for loading menu updates. It's highly unlikely that you would be involved in dealing with that. Here's a kind of a further annotation of how all this works. As I mentioned, the screen to the right is the icons that populate the face of the UI. The house takes you to that primary screen we talked about. That circle with the horizontal lines through it takes you to the screen that's shown there. That's where you can make adjustments to the cabinet by pressing this button, this leaf button. You can put it in what's called eco mode. It's not unlikely that you would have an instance where somebody had done this inadvertently and say that the cabinet's not reaching temperature. But if you push that button, you essentially reduce the temperature on that row to something less than and it's a programmable number, something less than the holding temperature that it's set for, basically to save energy. And then you push it again and it comes back. It's different than turning it off in that it doesn't go cold. It stays near to temperature, so that's a tool they can use with rows that are are unnecessary but might become necessary. They can reduce their power on and off. To turn them off completely, use these buttons over here. But again, all that stuff is revealed by pressing that button, so you get to that. If you push the day part button that's shown after you've done that, you can get to this, and then you will see the various menus that are available. By pressing those, you can change them globally. You can change it from breakfast to regular menu. You can change that globally. And I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here, but it's worth mentioning because you see these dots. Another feature that gets introduced to this cabinet is the ability to scroll. So in instances where you see an item with dots underneath it, that means you can take your finger, much like on your phone or your iPad, and you can rake across it and you can scroll. So on the regular menu up there, if you wanted to scroll to another menu, you could do it there by just raking across there. So that's pretty much that. The temperature, I guess we'll get to that in a minute. Another thing that's revealed when you press the icon below that, the wipe down icon, is the opportunity to, it puts it into the cooling mode, which is something you might be familiar with from earlier units. They have to be 125 degrees by McDonald spec to when they can clean them. So this puts them in cleaning mode. If, however, you just want to wipe off the screen because it's got grease on it and you don't want to inadvertently change a timer, whatnot, you push the clean button, this produces a new screen here with this lock button. The lock button just locks the screen for 10 seconds. So if you push the lock button after pushing the screen button or the cleaning button, you now have an opportunity for 10 seconds to meaningfully wipe down the screen without turning on any buttons or turning off any buttons. So that's where that's hidden, and probably more so than for text. For the store, this might be confusing and you might be asked about it, but that's that. The globe button changes the displayed language. It doesn't change the language of specific menus. We'll talk about that briefly, but that just changes the displayed language on the cabinet. The temperature button, push that and it shows you, as shown here, the temperature of the top plate and the temperature of the bottom plate. This cabinet, like the others, if you've got it set up for 3 slots, 3 food positions, they're all the positions, all the food items on a given slot. Say slot 2 there would have to have the same holding parameters. It won't allow you to put a product that has a 200-degree holding parameter on a slot. It just won't show you that product when you try to choose it on a slot that has, say, 175 degrees holding. Settings. This is the area that I mentioned that you reach by touching this cog. The first thing you enter is this where you can change the cabinet. This would be probably not that interesting to you guys, but that's where you can change the font size, the sound level, the temperature display from Fahrenheit to Celsius. You can turn off the use first piece. We'll get to what that means in a bit, but that's there. And then you can, if you press and hold down here, you can, where the scrolling dots are shown, you'll get essentially the same, like a table of contents that represents all the screens that you can scroll to. So if you want to get to something more quickly rather than scrolling one after the other, you can press down there and get to that essentially table of contents and make your way directly to what you're interested in. So as we talked about, this is the preferences we talked about briefly. Displayed language choice, we talked about eco mode options. That's where you're going to set the temperatures that surround how you want the cabinet to behave. You put it into eco mode. Zone diagnostics we'll talk about more in detail later. That's a diagnostic feature that you'll find useful if you're chasing a problem with an RTD or displayed temperature discrepancy. Passwords, you can change the manager's passwords. You can, and this is where you would correct the problem if somebody had done that for you and didn't bother to tell the manager. You can check the sound. You can check the screen with that. Day and time. This is something that might involve your getting into if the cabinet arrives at a site that's not central time, because we laid all that set here. When they leave, there are batteries to power the controller, at least that part of the controller when it's not powered up. So it should be accurate if you're in central time, but if not, you would, this is where you'd interact with that by pressing that button. And we'll see some more of that in a bit. Day parts is where you can name or turn off that menu. Wi-Fi is where you would hook it up to a Wi-Fi in the store if it's currently not in use in McDonald's. The error log is where you would see errors as in the cabinet, and this cabinet, unlike other products, doesn't use a code. If there's an error, there's an English explanation, or at least a brief word or two that gives you an idea of what happened. You don't get some, E34. You're going to have a word description of what went on. And the software versions I mentioned earlier as being important to you if you were changing an UI, because you have to do both the front and the back. That's not apparent that you're not seeing both when you see just the front. But if you replace the rear UI, you need to go through all this in the back to get to see the software load that's on that UI. Talked about languages. This is the languages right now that the cabinet can display. Here's the password that is the technician's password. It's 159357. It's made easy to remember by the fact it's essentially just an X pattern. The manager's password is 1955, which is McDonald's birth year. So if you're plugged into having a birthday party for McDonald's, then you'll know their birth year, and that's the code for the manager. But the tech code is essentially just an X pattern across the keys of the keypad. We've talked about this. This is where you change the displayed language. The way you would change or acquire a different language of products is different than here. This just changes that component of it. Changing the the menu load with, say, Spanish language articles, food articles, or whatnot is a different deal. This is where that's done. You have to go in through the USB, and you're going to, if it has them on board, it would allow you to choose among language-specific menus, and you will find in Australia, say, there would be, although that's English, you would find there'd be an Australian language to be chosen, and that essentially what you're doing there is choosing the Australian specific menu, and the same is true in other countries that speak English, in England, say, in which the products for that market are different. So when you choose a different language product or menu, you're choosing different products largely. You're not just changing the language of the items that you might be familiar with in the US. So here you'll see there's an Australian, a Canadian, Spanish, French. But as I said, if you change, in most instances, I'm sure there are exceptions where the menus are exactly the same. When you choose a menu that's different than the US, you're going to get not just the US menu translated, but a different collection of products. Here you'll see that we've done it. We've chosen Australian, and they have pockets, whatever the pockets might be. That's what they have, and it will scramble your display. So where previously something else was shown, now you'll have pockets. Just something to be aware of if you bumble into that. This is the system information page that we talked about. This is where you would populate some information if it was necessary. So this serial number, model number would be established here at Frymaster. The store number would need to be entered. The importance of this probably only comes to or only arises if the cabinet is on a network, and increasingly that is coming. So as our equipment goes online, can be seen from afar over the internet, then the necessity of entering that information rises. So it's something you might want to ask about, but that's something that needs to be done upon installation. This is our UI information that we talked about that's different front and back. So if you're putting in a new UI on the back, you need to put the UI software that's came with it for the one on the back, and you need to ensure that the versions are the same front and back. So again, you have to reach all of these, you have to use that code. As you scroll through the preferences section of and also other areas, if you see this icon, this lock icon, that means if you touch or attempt to change anything there, you're going to get this screen, and that means you're going to have to enter that code, and that lock will open, literally will open like here, and it pops open like the lock on your locker, and then you can close it by touching it. But that's you will see that icon throughout the menus that you scroll through, and if there's a lock, then you're going to have to enter a code of some sort. This is how the controller behaves. You saw this briefly in the video that I cut off, but it was some of this, as I mentioned earlier, the screens on that video were a little bit different than the later versions of the cabinet. But nonetheless, when the cabinet is warming, you'll see this screen as these progress bars make their way left to right. And then when it's at temperature, you'll see that they're gray. But this is still not timing. This is just that they're at temperature. These dotted lines down here represent the presence of a trivet in the tray itself. But again, this is just the cabinet at temperature, not timing anything. When it's timing, they'll be green, and you'll see the remaining hold time. If a second same product is chosen with a timer already running, the second one chosen will go gray. What happens is as this one expires, as it expires, this one would go bright green. It's just that part of the McDonald's first in, first out. Their intent is to exhaust this tray before they take anything from that. So they're using the first ones to go in before they use the second one of the same product to go in. When the timer has timed out, you'll see it go red, and then it'll start to add time, how long it's been the holding time for that product is exhausted. As it nears a holding time, an elapsed holding time, it'll turn yellow, and that's intended to serve as a cook more warning for the staff. We can, I'm going to skip over this. There's another, this whole training is available as kind of more interactive piece where you can touch on icons and it'll have pop-ups and show you different components. It's essentially the same things I'm talking about, but you can hover over them. It's on our Google Classroom page, and there will be, I'll talk about how to get to that later in the program, but if you want to spend more time with this, changing a product would be something that I wouldn't think that you guys would be involved with, so we'll skip ahead.
Product.
Essentially, this is how groups of products are created. So you go in, you click on this icon with the pencil, which means you're going to edit something, and you're going to go in here and create your eggs. You can change the layout of how they're done. Maybe we'll go back to that bit in a while, but that's basically a store function. You can create a product group, and basically what that means is you'll see here we've got egg whites. Well, eggs, virtually all the eggs are held at the same temperature. So if you found a reason in the store to change from egg whites to eggs to round eggs or scrambled eggs, whatever their other products that are all held at the same temperature, you could achieve a swap of this position from egg whites to, say, scrambled eggs just by taking your finger and swiping. So there's that dot function that we talked about earlier that's available in this cabinet and it's not been available before. So that's, you'll see those dots, that's what that means. And this video, again, I'm going to skip this one. It just shows you how to create a product group. Basically, you would find those things that have the same temperature and put them together and then put them in that product group. So once you've chosen a product that's in a product group, that product would be shown along with the number of dots that were equal to the number of products that you could swipe to by going across that. Again, we're going to skip that one. Here is the menu screen, and I think this is the stuff that you perhaps will retain more so than the detailed instructions on how to make your way into changing products. But there's that lock. This would be probably a 1955 change to go in and change the menu. Anytime you see an X, that cancels entry. Anytime you see a pencil, that's going to allow editing. And anytime you see a plus sign, that's going to, and you can add, that's where you're going to, if you wanted to add a new product here, you would start with the business of the plus to begin that process. So you would then go in and name it, put in its whole time, so on and so on. Now let's watch this one. This is the preference screens that we talked about.
Navigate to the home screen by pressing the house icon. Pressing the screen icons allows navigation of features within the controller. The gear icon opens a path to 11 screens. The first is Preferences, where font sizes, sound levels, and other functions in the cabinet can be adjusted. Move through the screens by scrolling. The next screen is the Calendar, where the date and time are adjusted if necessary. The options are labeled, and those that require a password to change are marked by a lock icon in the bottom left. Zone Diagnostics provides a window to the cabinet's temperature holding ability. It also shows the temperature of the component shelf and the controller. It has a role in troubleshooting, which will be covered later. The sound and screen display quality can be sampled with a password, 159357. Press the green check after entering the code. The error logs contain non-coded errors. The manager's passcode can be changed. It requires entering the tech passcode first, 159357. System information and utilities are found in this section of the software. Navigation of the menu is possible with scrolling or by pressing and holding the dot pattern to display a matrix of choices. Navigate to your choice by tapping it.
So that's a lot of what we covered earlier. Here is the zone diagnostics. This is the piece that I mentioned that would be most useful to you if you're chasing an issue with a temperature that's a row that's not holding temperature. You can test the RTD's accuracy by looking at this. This is your set point. This is the actual temperature. By entering the test code, you can open this up. You could go in and change this to, say, 100 degrees, 150 degrees, and see if this changes. There will be more slides that address this in a minute, but essentially if it's more than 5 degrees, I think, off, no, 15 degrees off, this changes color. So you can see if there's an issue there. You can see, you can move the wires from the RTDs on the board, change the position to see if you're chasing a problem that's associated with the RTD or with the board, see where the problem goes. This temperature control, that's our control temperature. This is actually the measurement of the temperature within that shelf that's holding all those components. So, and that's important because the reaction of the to touch of the controls of the UIs becomes a little dicey if the temperatures get above, between 140 and 160. It starts to get a little dicey. So that's an issue. If that were the problem, that's what you were responding to. You could look to see if that temperature were too high. In that instance, you'd probably want to look at the fans, because this unit does have 2 cooling fans for that purpose, to cool that shelf. One thing that top bullet mentions is that when we get to the error log piece, the errors aren't logged into the temperature errors, particularly aren't logged into the error log unless they last for at least 15 minutes. The reason for that is with trays being taken out, putting back, cold trays near a window, you need time for it to stabilize and understand that there is indeed a problem there and not just something that was introduced locally by circumstance. Again, here's kind of the bit about the control diagnostics. This is our set point. That's the temperatures measured by the RTDs. We can go in and change it. We can change 185 to 150, and we can see that go red because it's too hot for the prescribed point. So it is 5 degrees above set point when it goes blue. I was a little wrong-footed when I said earlier it was 15. It's 15 minutes for the error control. So then you see the same thing here where the temperature is too cold. This is where the RTDs connect to the board. It's a pretty robust connection that clips into place, but you can unplug that and move it to another position on the board to see if the issue with a slot is isolated to the RTD on the board or on the cabinet, on the plate, or to this connection or something related to the board. You can swap that around and revisit the zone diagnostics to see where your problem resides. This is a short video that shows using the zone diagnostics.
From the home screen, navigate to the Preferences screens. Scroll to Zone Diagnostics. Tap and hold a set point position on the graphic. Enter 159357 on the keypad. Press the check mark. Press and hold a white set point position. Enter a temperature on the keypad that's more than 5 degrees off the set point. The color-coded temperature matrix turns red if the entered temperature is too hot, blue if too cold. This can be used when checking accuracy of the heater plate RTDs. The temperature of the component shelf is also displayed on this screen. The RTD terminals can be removed and swapped on the main I/O board while using this diagnostic tool. The cabinet can also be tested by pressing the service test box, which changes a number of set points to out of range. This results in color changes on a number of slots. An out-of-range temperature that lasts more than 15 minutes will produce an error code on the touchscreen and record an error in the log.
This is the error log that we spoke of. This is where you would find plain English explanations of an error that had occurred. So, and there's a time, and like here, secondary UI communication loss. A lot of these were created essentially for picture taking purposes by unplugging things, but you can see that there's that you're not trying to sort things with a decoder ring. You've got plain language description of problems as they've shown on the cabinet. And that's pretty much the top and bottom of where things are in this cabinet and how it behaves, what diagnostic tools you have. As I said, we've had considerable runtime with them in the store. The stores seem to be adapting to them pretty readily. We haven't had a lot of reporting back from the field in regards to problems with them. This slide is just a further mention of the online training that we have that would allow you, in this instance, this is not a live slide, but you would click here, click there, it pops up and tells you where these things are. It gives you a little more, I won't say hands-on, but a little more sense of the layout of the cabinet. And this is in a place in Google, the Google world, called Google Classroom. And we have a module for this cabinet as well as many other modules for our equipment. You can request an emailed invitation to this site by just getting in touch with us at Frymaster.com, and we will email you an invitation. This is the way it's arranged. If you take the class on this platform and pass, you have to make an 80 to pass, then there's a test, you make an 80, and you'll be emailed a certificate of completion for having done that. It covers essentially the same thing we've covered here, but if you want another go at this, you're certainly welcome to go there and look at this. And as you know, this is posted online as well. So that being said, that's our introduction to the new UHCHD-T. Thanks for your time.